Able to launch missiles and target sites in mere seconds. How will the new era of AI warfare unfold? Using artificial intelligence, the U.S. military struck 2,000 targets in Iran in the first 4 days of its campaign. It's unprecedented, but what does it mean for oversight and accountability? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is AI warfare. Over the last 2 years, the U.S. military has further integrated artificial intelligence into its operations, and it's having a devastating effect in Iran. It's meant that real-time data analysis has shortened the so-called kill chain from hours or days to just seconds. The U.S.-Israeli onslaught on Iran may well be recorded in history as the first fully AI-driven war. But could lightning-fast decision-making lead to more errors? And would any human be held accountable? Here's a look now at how the face of war has forever changed.
Artificial intelligence is at the forefront of the war on Iran. The United States is leaning heavily on AI tools and launching airstrikes at an unprecedented pace. According to a report by Air Wars, a civilian harm watchdog, in just the first 4 days of the war, the US and Israel hit more targets than the US-led coalition did in the first 6 months of the war against Daesh. Traditionally, carrying out a strike takes time. Militaries follow what's known as a kill chain. Officers identify a target, make decisions, prepare forces, and then execute the strike. Today, the Pentagon deploys Maven Smart System, developed by the AI firm Palantir, to automatically complete all the processes in just minutes. The system analyzes mountains of data from drones, satellites, and other intelligence sources. It determines targets, selects the most suitable munitions and time for the attack, all in a matter of seconds, and then assesses the results.
This is revolutionary. We were having this done in about 8 or 9 systems where humans were literally moving detections left and right in order to get to our desired end state, in this case, actually closing a kill chain. Where are we going from here? Obviously, there's many things that we have to accomplish. We're not done yet.
But one of the generative AI models used by Palantir is now in a dispute with Washington. Anthropic has demanded that the Department of Defense not use its Claude platform for mass domestic surveillance and fully autonomous weapons. That's prompted the US administration to blacklist Anthropic and order all federal agencies to stop using its systems within 6 months. OpenAI, the owner of ChatGPT, seized the opportunity and signed a deal with the department to deploy its models. And recently, Palantir's CEO has expressed the company's full backing to the US military.
We at Palantir support warfighters, and once the war starts, we stop. We're not interested in debating how we're supporting them. We are very, very proud to have our role in making sure that American men and women come home safe and happy and proud of what they're doing. And that sometimes means that people on the other side don't go home.
Still, the deployment of AI raises enormous concerns about how targets are chosen and who is held accountable. AI's role in the incident is not known, but on March the 5th, an airstrike on an Iranian emergency medical base in a park in the city of Shiraz killed 20 people. An investigation by Newsline magazine found that a military site just 200 meters away from the civilian area was left untouched. Mistake or not, civilians were killed and international law was breached. And with the machine's lightning-fast targeting, the stakes get even higher. AI is now on battlefields, a turning point with historic consequences.
Joining me now to look further at AI warfare and its future are from Vienna, Chief Scientist of the AI Institute of the University of New South Wales, Toby Walsh, and from Chicago, Associate Professor at the School of Media Studies at the New School, Peter Asaro, thanks both so much for being with me. Peter, I'll start with you. What really concerns you about the use of AI weapons here? Give me an example or examples, if you can, of why this shift toward AI warfare is kind of a game changer and why anyone should be worried about it.
I think there's two reasons to be really concerned about the way these AI systems are being used. One is that they're developing targets using AI and large language models, which we know make a lot of mistakes and are very hard to make reliable and verifiable. And it's not clear to what degree humans are checking those and verifying the accuracy of those target selections. And then you start to think about the bigger problem of when you scale all of this up. And what this really fundamentally is automation. And that allows them to strike many more targets in a much shorter period of time that we just heard. And that means there's less opportunities for political and military decision making. Generally, war is a cultural phenomenon, and you're trying to use military force to change the decisions of your adversary. But if you're accelerating the level of destruction and you're doing this in an automated fashion, I think it becomes more and more difficult to negotiate peace or de-escalate conflict situations, and it becomes less clear who's actually in control of the conflict ultimately.
It's interesting, Peter, because you say these systems can make a lot of mistakes, but the question then is, I mean, more mistakes than humans? And if we look at perhaps what's happening now in the context of Iran, where the real decision making has been left in the hands of human beings, and many people are not at all satisfied with the decisions that have been made to go to war. Is it necessarily a bad option to turn to AI instead, that if they're programmed correctly could actually make more rational, life-saving choices?
They could be potentially more accurate, but again, you have to, what's your definition of accuracy? What are you comparing that against? And how do you know if you aren't verifying the final targets and what's destroyed? But even if you reduce, say, the number of civilian casualties per strike, but you're multiplying the number of strikes 5, 10, 20 times, you're still going to wind up with a lot more civilian casualties. And what we've been seeing in this conflict is a lot of civilian casualties, as well as a lot of cultural sites and civilian infrastructure being destroyed at a very, very rapid pace. And once this sort of happened, now, one of the objectives stated for the war was to convince, the people to rise up against their leadership. But now you're actually creating a momentum around nationalism because the U.S. is targeting what appears to be indiscriminately, or it's difficult to say what's an Israeli target versus a U.S. target.
Yeah, well, let me see what Toby thinks of that, because, some would argue, yes, we are now facing the prospect of much more protracted wars, but arguably, some will say, with fewer, in spite of what Peter was saying, fewer human casualties and less psychological pressure on those very soldiers who no longer have to point a weapon into the face of an enemy and pull the trigger themselves. So that there is somewhat of a net positive, because if we look at our wars past, World War I and World War II, they only lasted arguably 4 years or so, but millions more military personnel and civilians were lost in those cases.
I don't think it's such a simple comparison. But certainly, if you look at the cadence of war, the speed that we're now fighting war, it's been increased by an order of magnitude by the use of these tools. It's worth remembering that Project Maven, the targeting system that's Palantir developed, was originally a project that Google was working on it, and the employees at Google famously walked out because they felt that it wasn't going to be reliable enough. The technology wasn't going to be accurate enough to be able to remove humans from a lot of the decision making. So it is, I think, rightly called the third revolution in warfare. The first being the invention of gunpowder, the second being the invention of nuclear weapons, both step changes in the speed and deadliness of war. And I think we're seeing again, this is another step change in the speed and deadliness of war. And if we look back at the history of where we've changed the speed and deadliness of war, whether with machine guns or nuclear weapons, it hasn't necessarily been making warfare any less of a terrible thing than it is.
Okay, let me actually introduce our third panelist now, who's just made it. So glad you're here, Lyric Hughes Hale. She also joins us from Chicago. She's editor-in-chief of EconVue. Thanks so much for being with us. Let me ask you this question, though, as I'm kind of playing devil's advocate, I guess, on the issue of AI warfare and what most people view as kind of a net negative. They feel there's too much risk here, actually putting civilians more at risk with the decision making. But then there are others that say AI has given, for example, Ukraine a chance to fight a massive Goliath-style military on more equal footing. What do you make of those arguments? Do you think AI is a net positive or negative here in warfare?
I think it certainly, and especially because of the new factor is drones in warfare. It's increased speed and targeting, as the other speakers have mentioned. But if it were so effective, why is the war in Ukraine still being fought? It doesn't seem to be decisive because technology, one side's technology gets fought by the other side. So although there are drones, there are also jamming technologies that are making them ineffective. So at the end of the day, you're kind of where you were. If you take it to the extreme, and AI with nuclear weapons, which is always the most destructive thing that we can think about, as far as I know, no nation is allowing AI decision making for nuclear war. And I don't think that's going to probably ever happen, hopefully not. But I think if we could widen the lens for a moment and look at this, what's going to be decisive in Iran and also with Russia might not be actually the technology nor the AI, but the economic ramifications. Certainly in a country like Turkey that imports most of its oil, for example, the US, for every dollar increase in the price of oil, the US is affected, but maybe by 0.1% in terms of its GDP. But the Gulf nations, it's thought now will be affected by 14% of their GDP this year. So I think what's going to hopefully bring these conflicts to an end will be the economic costs, particularly the costs of energy.
Okay, so potentially, at least maybe at this present time, we're overestimating the work of the AI technology involved here and how the war ultimately plays out and what could potentially bring it to an end. But I'd still like to
Exactly.
stick with AI because there is so much unknown here and how far it could really go. And then the fear for many is that it could just really catch us by surprise because it's not fully understood what the implications are, how the technology could develop and into what realm. So, Peter, I'll ask you, in this specific point, if you can help us understand what companies like Palantir and its founder, Peter Thiel, what they really want AI to do. Because, there's also the prospect of civilian surveillance that people are deeply disturbed by and how that's folding into the equation. So explain the other kind of what people see as the nefarious roles, those are more suspicious, obviously, the nefarious roles of AI creators and their ultimate goal in the game.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear when you look at a company like Palantir, it's a data analytics company. And so for many years, they've taken data from many different sources and tried to integrate it and find some kind of useful insights from it. And now AI is able to automate that at a much higher level. So they can take satellite imagery and communications and all sorts of human intelligence, mix it all together, and then AI will produce a story about it and a narrative and an explanation of how these things fit together or whether something is a target. But they want to see the world as a data set and automate all of that kind of analysis. But when it really comes to human decision making, and especially military strategy or political strategy, there's a lot more that happens than just data analysis. You have to understand context, you have to understand intentions and emotions, and estimating threats and their potential reality and their consequences. in a lot of complex ways that involve value judgments, that involve understanding human character and nature in complex ways. And AI will tell you a story about those things based on what it's read and what it's been trained with, but it doesn't really understand those things. And so you get stories that seem plausible and believable. And as humans, we're very willing to believe the stories it tells, but they're not always correct. And the idea that we can resolve conflict or political conflict or military conflict through data analysis alone is kind of absurd.
Let me ask Toby if you're on the same page there.
Well, to actually take that story about, it's all about processing data, and a lot of what we're seeing in changing the character of war, it's also changing what we do. It's now possible to process so much information that the targets we're selecting are things like the supreme leader. And then the supreme leader's son, who was then elected as supreme leader. So it's, I think we're going to look back and realize that we changed the way that we prosecuted war. We actually can now, by processing all this information, can go after the leadership of a country. And now, whether that's actually going to make warfare a quicker or a more protracted thing, it's hard to know. But it's definitely an example of how which AI is changing the way that we go about war. We couldn't previously do that before, but we can now quite reliably say, well, we will try and take out the leader.
Yeah, and I mean, that's,
Can I just
again,
jump in?
go ahead, Peter, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been a very strong transition to these targeted killings and assassinations and leadership decapitation as a strategy. But what we know from the history of the end of terror organizations over the 20th century and the targeting of the leaderships of those organizations is that's not an effective strategy.
Exactly.
Most institutions, most governments don't collapse when you eliminate the leaders. And so the technology sort of gives you this possibility, and it seems like an easy kind of political or military strategy, but it's not. It doesn't work, and it leads you into thinking it could be successful.
And, we should think about China in all of this. What is the other big military superpower? We haven't talked about China. However, recently, you've probably followed how the military, the PLA, has been purged. So right now, China has incredible AI capabilities. However, they have nobody who has had actual battlefield experience in the PLA anymore. So I think, to Peter's point about it's experience that matters. It's not just the data collection that will be critical.
Yeah, in the
We'll
battlefield
see what happens.
itself. Before, I'd
Yes,
like to actually speak a little bit further about that, especially on the aspect of, U.S. adversaries, if we can call them that, how they're watching this war being fought, China and Russia in particular. But before we do, I still want to look at the creators of AI and their roles. And we see, two of the major systems, Palantir and Anthropic, very much at odds. Toby, I'll come back to you for this, because what about Anthropic here stopping the Department of Defense from using its Claude platform for what they said was mass domestic surveillance and fully autonomous weapons? Is it a noble stance they're taking, or is it maybe arguably a preventative measure to not face potential legal liabilities in the future?
Well, it's a bit of a Pyrrhic stance that they've taken, because OpenAI have signed a contract immediately to take that on. So it's not really going to hold back the Department of War in any way at all. And it's worth remembering, what were the two red lines that they stood up? Well, one was autonomous weapons, but the other was domestic surveillance. Because we're back to this idea that these AI tools are fantastic tools for collecting information together. And then using that, but the fact that the Department of War wasn't prepared to put up with that red line says something quite troubling about how these technologies might be used in the future, because this was using it for domestic surveillance of the American population.
And Toby, do you think what is happening now in that specific context is unique to this administration, and it could be flipped if the administration or the U.S. government changes, even at the midterms?
Well, yes. I mean, the first act in the second term of the Trump presidency was to undo a presidential executive order to undo all of the AI safety regulations that Biden had introduced. So it's clear that this is an administration that wants to remove all of those guardrails. And I do think that the tech industry, which were standing up behind Trump at the inauguration, are now discovering that it's quite a difficult place to be standing, and that their relationship is not necessarily as smooth for anyone.
Lyric, what do you make of that?
I think that technology trumps politics very often, and I think once you have these data collection uh, processes in place, it's very hard to reverse them. But, all in all, I think that what we're talking about here is speed rather than autonomy on the part of AI. And also that even though the technology matters, war is still human, it's political, and it's very uncertain. And so, yes, whether or not these things are in place, in the end, it's going to be the very upper leadership that makes these decisions, not just in the United States, but everywhere on Earth.
Okay, Peter, I mean,
But
that's
that's where I worry that war will stay human. That when you're looking at thousands of
exactly.
targets being selected in the first day of the conflict in Iran, whether there's any meaningful human oversight of those decisions, and people are just pressing the button and agreeing to whatever the machine spits out, and that's potentially leading to some of these errors and civilian casualties that we see, because the cadence of war has changed in such a way that humans are no longer actually really in charge.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask Peter, because then we move into uh, this case for zero accountability, and that humans don't have to take responsibility because the AI will effectively be in charge. And those are the real fears of the people warning against the rapid development of AI and its use, especially in warfare. So, are we looking at now real questions of what kind of legislation needs to be explored that perhaps this administration in power now will try to prevent full force and kind of already has?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen across the tech sector and the evolution of digital technology the externalization of risk, right? And so this can happen within military command and control as well. And that's why we've been working since 2014 to get an international treaty to prohibit autonomous weapons, to require meaningful human control over targeting and use of autonomy in weapon systems in the military. We're getting closer, hopefully, to a treaty negotiation in Geneva over that. But I think we need broader regulations around the tech industry and data collection and mass surveillance. And these need to be domestic laws, but they also need to be international laws. Many of these companies are operating globally. They have users and customers on a global basis. And this technology is moving very quickly, and the regulation was moving slowly, and now it's being sort of pushed back at this point by this administration and others.
Yeah, Lyric, you brought up U.S. competitors, really, and what they're exploring and what they're observing now as the U.S. and Israel continue to attack Iran using a lot of AI-driven warfare. Talk more then about how you think U.S. competitors are viewing this, because we've heard some of the leaders in AI argue that we need to, in a sense, take out the human factor or we'll fall behind. The more we look at legislation and how to be more sensitive toward the risks, the more the U.S. is going to fall behind its adversaries who don't care. They're not putting up those kinds of blocks. They're just going to power forward with the technology and its development, and the U.S. will effectively be left completely vulnerable.
Well, first of all, I think that the targeting of Iranian leaders was completely approved, regardless of how that was executed. There was nobody who pushed a button who did not feel that they had leadership approval for what they were doing, and that they had a broad strategy to do what they've been doing. But really, I think you can have legislation and treaties, but maybe this is my economist point of view. I think the real guardrails are economic. And that will be true for China, that will be true for the United States. and for your country
But
as well.
I think we're seeing in Iran that it's not, the economics hadn't been fully considered before the so-called military strategy. So if we're looking at AI, fine, the economic damage can be done and people can, say it's regrettable, but it was still done. And that's what I'm talking about with this AI having to go ahead quickly in order for the U.S. to keep a military advantage.
Well, I think you get into then the rationale for the whole war in the first place. And I think what I'm talking about is long-term economics.
Okay.
And that is the U.S. policy, right? We did this in our estimation because a greater threat existed that would have created more destruction.
Okay.
Whether or not you agree with that is a completely different story, right?
All right.
But that doubt that that's the administration policy.
Lyric, we're unfortunately going to have to leave it there. We're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers, so I'd like to thank all three of you sincerely so much for being with me and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.